So these are my favorite pants. Okay, so they were my favorite pants until my mom cut the leg off. See, my mom owned a sewing business on the side. It's called Sue Sews, because her name is Sue and she sews. I think we can all agree that's pretty adorable. She's been sewing since she was 10 years old, and in a childhood where she wasn't always valued or respected, sewing gave her dignity. It gave her joy. When my sister and I were little, she would sew us these beautiful dresses. And I remember once she sewed one for me that had this tiny little bell in the skirt. And so when I walked, it jingled. And of course, like any 6-year-old, I then decided to walk and shimmy and twirl everywhere I went. I felt like a princess. As we grew older, my mom sewed surgical caps for my sister. She sewed on military patches for my dad and I, and she repaired beloved stuffed animals for her grandsons. One day, Walter, a well-loved stuffed elephant, was returned to my son with the needles still inside. Thankfully, we found them before our toddler did, but that was the first time that we realized that my mom, who had cared for everyone her entire life, now needed to be protected from herself. So there we were, in her favorite place on earth, her sewing room, and she had just realized that she accidentally cut the leg off my favorite pants. And she was sitting in the middle of her floor, surrounded by quilting scraps and red dress forms and pin cushions that looked like big red strawberries. And she was crying, defeated by Alzheimer's disease. That was the first time I discovered the magic of finding joy in the most unexpected places. I worked in direct care for many years, and some might say I still do. As a caregiver, I prepared meals, I fed people, I bathed people. I did this for people who relied on me for my informed, ethical, and compassionate care. They relied on it not only for their health and safety, but for their dignity and ease. And I didn't always do it well. I cut corners. I got frustrated. But most of the time, I checked boxes. I wonder if instead of checking boxes, we looked for joy. Because it's really not about just getting things done. A shift happened when I learned about person-centered care. Person-centered care looks like knocking before entering, asking permission, using plain, respectful language. But really, it's about creating joy, not just getting stuff done. I remember looking for joy the first time I accompanied my mom to a doctor's appointment following her diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. All previous doctor's appointments to this point, she had attended with me. She was my advocate. But this was new and different, and we were still feeling our way around it. We were sitting in the lobby, and my mom had sort of drifted into her own thoughts. And the nurse comes out. She says, "Susan?" And my mom didn't hear her. And I didn't say anything. And she says again, "Susan." And for the first time, it became my job to advocate for my mom. So I very gently leaned over and said, "Oh, looks like it's your turn, Mom." So we hopped up and we followed the nurse, and by followed the nurse, I mean chased the nurse down that labyrinth of hallways in the back of the clinic. You know how that looks? And we learned very early on in my mom's disease that her love language was just good old-fashioned gossip. And so I wasn't at all surprised when she leans over to me and not so quietly says, "Well, I don't know where the hell we're going." I didn't correct her. I just leaned into this very unexpected moment of joy in this very unexpected place. And I jumped right in and I said, "Yeah, I don't know where she's taking us." Ugh. With just the right amount of eye roll to really sell it, you know? So we get into this tiny exam room. We find an extra chair. We prepare ourselves for the barrage of questions. Have you traveled outside of the country? Have you fallen recently? What's your date of birth? And that, folks, was the moment my mom lost her dignity. I watched it happen. She looked at me stricken because she didn't know her birthday. No, she knew her birthday, or rather, she knew she should know her birthday. But she didn't. And in that moment, I watched as Alzheimer's split a crack through her. A crack that had been chiseled away under the surface for years. And in that moment, she shattered. Another win for Alzheimer's. And so I wonder, what could care look like if instead of checking boxes, we created moments of joy? What could care look like if we started the conversation with, "What matters most to you, Susan?" Perhaps the work would actually become easier and more fulfilling. Perhaps we could walk hand in hand with people during the most significant parts of their journey. I selfishly ask this because my mom deserved dignity on her final journey. But I also ask it because your grandma and your aunt and your neighbor's sister, because they also deserve dignity. We say that dignity is a human right, but if that were true, we wouldn't see it slipping away in hospital beds and memory care units and waiting rooms. And that's the dignity paradox. I first saw this paradox the first time my mom put her phone in the freezer. We looked for that thing forever. And when we finally found it, she had a lot of excuses. Her hands were full, the door was stuck. See, she had a lot of excuses in those early weeks and months. Because just like her birthday, she knew she should know that her phone does not go in the freezer. And I could have drawn attention to it. I could have corrected her. But dignity is about how we show up. It's about how we respond. I could have said, "Mom, why did you put your phone in the freezer?" Or I could have said, "Don't worry about it. I did the same thing last week." One corrects and the other connects. And in that shift, we make room for joy. Not the kind of joy, though, that comes from fixing things or organizing things, though I do love a good label maker. It's the joy that comes from laughing at the absurdity of finding your mom's phone next to the frozen peas. It's stepping into their reality, not pulling them back into yours. But it's not easy. In fact, many times it's really hard. People often assume that the hardest parts of Alzheimer's are when my mom forgot my name. It wasn't. The hardest part was the anger and the accusations and the paranoia. I remember one time she looked at me, eyes burning. She said, You did this to me. But the scariest parts of Alzheimer's often come down to safety. A few days after my mom lost her driver's license to the state, it was just no longer safe for her. She was understandably angry, paranoid. And my dad woke up in the middle of the night to find the house empty. She was gone. She wasn't lost. She knew exactly where she was. She had walked 3 miles in the middle of the night on a dark highway to sleep on the pew of her church. Now remember, she had not shared her secret with anyone. And so when the staff found her in the morning, they were confused. They were worried. And so they called my dad, and it landed on him to share her secret for the first time. And I can't help but wonder if our society treated Alzheimer's with meal trains and prayer chains, maybe she wouldn't have felt so isolated. I can't help but wonder if maybe her ladies' coffee group hadn't just gossiped about her and instead actually showed up for her. Because stigma has hidden Alzheimer's. Until now. In Japan, there is a beautiful art where they take gold and they fix broken pottery with it. It's called kintsugi. And there's a beautiful village in the Netherlands that does the same thing, but they do it with people. In both, they honor the beauty that is coming from that change. In 1993, Janet Spiring was working with her team to build a traditional nursing home in Amsterdam. During their strategic planning, she very smartly asked the question, would I want my mom to live here? And there was a resounding no from the rest of the team. Because they all knew what traditional dementia care looks like. It looks like fluorescent lights and locked doors and that stinging scent of antiseptic. They knew what it looked like, and they said no. So instead, they built something human. They built a village. They built a home where residents live in places that are familiar to them, that look the same way that they've always lived their life. They grocery shop for their own groceries. They prepare their meals. They go on walks in the neighborhood. At Dahogovic, they experience life. They experience joy. But I'll be honest, joy doesn't always look the way that we expect it to. Did you know that people in the later stages of dementia often don't recognize themselves in the mirror? In fact, for many, it's terrifying because they believe someone is in their room, someone is watching them. And many care facilities actually remove the mirrors from the wall to protect their safety and comfort. But not my mom. My mom loved the woman in that mirror. Every time she'd walk by a mirror, she would wave and she would say hello. And one time she looks at me and she says, "Oh, she is so kind." I said, "Yeah, Mom, she is." The interesting thing about that is I watched her, a woman I have loved my entire life, watching herself. And that is a mix of emotions, because what a joyful moment, mixed up in something very heavy. And sometimes in those moments, it's about choosing to embrace what's in front of you instead of mourning what is lost. In 2019, our lives were overflowing. We had a baby on the way, new jobs, grad school, guards, and we were all about to experience COVID. My mom's disease was progressing rapidly, and we needed help keeping her safe. I never expected that I would be looking at adult day services for my mom at the young age of 65. But I was. And what I found was nothing short of miraculous. Daybreak, the adult day services program, they knew that she had not disclosed her secret about her diagnosis. And they gave us a gift that I can't even quantify. It was so meaningful. They welcomed her into their program as a volunteer. They even gave her a name badge. And so on her first day of volunteer orientation, she spent the afternoon passing out cookies and chatting with guests and hearing stories and sharing stories. She talked a lot. When she left that day on the drive home, she says to me, "These ladies really need that. This is really great for elderly people." I said, "Yeah, it really is a great program for elderly people." That's the paradox. It's watching your mom in an adult day program at the age of 65 and finding that that moment is about hope. She found far more than safety that day. She found dignity. And you don't have to overhaul an entire healthcare system to find it, though I think we probably should. You can do it in one small human moment. You can slow down, you can listen, you can ask questions. Because when you do, that's when the cracks fill with gold. Here's the thing. We ended up laughing about these pants. We sat in the middle of her sewing room floor, her favorite place on earth, And we laughed until we cried at the fact that she cut off the leg of my favorite pants. Because somehow, in this terrible, impossible disease, she found joy. And because of her, so did I.